As soon as the beads of blood fell, they scattered. A blood-red shadow, the size of a baby, suddenly appeared in the leaf magic tool. The situation changed drastically in an instant. The leaf magic tool immediately stopped expanding and shrank rapidly, tightly wrapping around the blood-red baby-like shadow. In a short moment, it turned into a green ball and flew back to Han Wennan. Zhang Kunlun, still holding his long sword, followed closely behind the green ball and attacked Han Wennan. I immediately understood. Zhang Kunlun's slash looked stupid, but he had purposely revealed a flaw. Then, he used his long sword as a pen to write a formation on the leaf magic tool. Then, he used his blood to trigger the formation's effect. It wasn't hard to guess what the formation was. Han Wennan had used the green leaf magic tool to target Zhang Kunlun. That was why his aura was locked on Zhang Kunlun. The effect of the formation was to imitate his aura and create a fake body. From the beginning to the end, Zhang Kunlun had a good plan. He was just waiting for Han Wennan to take the bait. In the end, he successfully tricked the leaf magic tool and Han Wennan. Then he used a formation and a mouthful of blood to break the leaf magic tool. Of course, it sounded simple, but it was actually very risky. If Zhang Kunlun had been one step slower, he would have been trapped by the leaf magic tool. At that time, he wouldn't have been able to use any of his tricks. Moreover, his formation wasn't simple. Not only did he trick the leaf magic tool, but he could also make the leaf magic tool lose its effect for a short time. At this moment, the leaf dermic artifact had curled up into a green ball. It was obvious that it could not be used. Han Wennan had lost his heavenly master dermic artifact. No matter how extravagant the Han family was, it was impossible for Han Wennan to have two celestial master dermic artifacts on him at the same time. On the other hand, Zhang Kunlun had only carved a formation and spat out a mouthful of blood, which did not affect him at all. The two of them were of the same realm, and their family backgrounds were similar. Their strengths were just a hair's breadth apart. A celestial master dermic artifact could very well be the deciding factor in the final outcome. The truth was indeed so. After Zhang Kunlun attacked with the green ball of light, Han Wennan didn't have any time to react at all. In a hurry, she moved her hands, and the Dao Qi in her body surged out. She actually used her palms to fight Zhang Kunlun in close combat. It was obvious that both of them had practiced martial arts. The cyan sword in Zhang Kunlun's hand emitted a cold air. Although Han Wennan had lost his celestial master dermic artifact, he used his surging Dao Qi and skilled fighting skills to block Zhang Kunlun's first wave of attacks. However, his situation was still very bad. Chapter 259. The direction of the battle in the arena was obvious. Zhang Kunlun wasn't going to let Han Wennan off. The cyan light sword in his hand didn't give Han Wennan any chance to catch his breath. Every attack was aimed at his vitals. Han Wennan was still persevering, but his Dao energy was getting weaker and weaker. His speed was getting slower and slower, and the wounds on his body were increasing. I sighed and felt sorry for Han Wennan. Even though his talent wasn't as good as Zhang Kunlun's, I was sure that his power wasn't as weak as what he had shown today. He and Zhang Kunlun had completely different personalities. Zhang Kunlun was calm and simple. I could tell from the day we agreed not to use the silver talisman. He only wanted to win with his fists and kicks. However, Zhang Kunlun was different. His smiling face hid a cunning heart. From the beginning of today's battle, he had planned everything. Not only had he used the formation to break Han Wennan's heavenly master celestial weapon, but he had also used the close-range combat method to pressure Han Wennan so that he wouldn't give Han Wennan a chance to breathe. It was all within his calculations. I guessed that before the battle had even started, he had already memorized everything in his mind. After all, Han Wunnan was the legitimate son of the Han family. In this battle, even though he had been tricked and lost his heavenly master magical artifact, as long as he had a chance to catch his breath, I believed that he would be able to turn the situation around. However, Zhang Kunlun did not give him any chance at all. Zhang Kunlun's smiling face was just like Han Wennan's leaf magic tool. After wrapping around the enemy, no matter how hard he struggled, the outcome wouldn't change. After a few minutes, Han Wennan finally gave up resisting. He knelt on one knee and panted heavily. Zhang Kunlun also jumped back in tacit agreement. The long sword in his hand was slung behind his back, and it suddenly disappeared. The slight killing intent on his face also disappeared, and his entire person returned to his previous amiable and smiling appearance. Don't be afraid of the cold-faced eagle, only the smiling tiger. Looking at Zhang Kunlun's harmless face, I couldn't help but raise my guard. I had to be careful when dealing with him in the future. The people from the Metaphysics Association and Qinling Han family quickly ran to the arena to help Han Wennan up to check on his injuries. President Gu then announced the final result of the battle. After that, the people from the Metaphysics Association and the other families dispersed. The Metaphysics Association had other rules regarding the distribution of the obsidian stones, so no one was in a hurry. Just as I was about to leave, Yang Shilong came to look for me. He told me that the Metaphysics Association's test for the 5 elements would be held tomorrow, and that I shouldn't be late. I nodded and smiled as I thanked him for the scarlet talisman that he had given me that day. Afterwards, I took out the Scarlet Earth Fiend talisman and said that I hadn't used it in the end, so I wanted to return it to him. However, Yang Shilong waved his hand and said with a smile, "This old man isn't proficient in the Tao of Talismans. However, you are still in the pressure point realm, so this Earth Fiend talisman is still useful. Since he had good intentions, I would seem pretentious if I continued to reject him." I smiled and nodded before keeping the Scarlet Earth Fiend talisman. After bidding farewell to Yang Shilong, I asked Yi Pianpian about the things to take note of during the test for the 5 elements on the way back. Yi Pianpian smiled, faintly. "It's just a test, so there's nothing to take note of. Moreover, the results aren't important. You just have to treat it normally." I didn't understand what she said, so I quickly asked, "Isn't the more elemental talents one has, the stronger one's battle prowess in the glory of consciousness realm? Why isn't it important?" Yi Pianpian frowned and shook her head. "The 5 elemental talents are related to one's battle prowess in the glory of consciousness realm. However, you have to know that battle prowess and cultivation are 2 different things. Whether your battle prowess is strong or not doesn't have any influence on whether you can reach the celestial master realm. Only your cultivation realm and comprehension will determine whether you can advance to the celestial master realm. Hence, the 5 elemental talents aren't important. If you have more, you can cultivate more to increase your battle prowess. If it's less, it's a good thing, as you can focus on increasing your realm and comprehension. You don't have to worry about it." I was stunned before I nodded in understanding. On the way back, I kept thinking about what Yi Pianpian had said. The more I thought about it, the more solemn I felt. Ever since I'd stepped onto the path of cultivation, no one had ever told me about the relationship between battle prowess and cultivation. I hadn't thought much about it, and had even mixed the 2 together. It was true that the consumption of Dao Qi during battle and the recovery of Dao Qi after battle were helpful in increasing one's Dao Qi. However, the battle itself didn't have much influence on cultivation realm and comprehension. Taking myself as an example, there was no need to mention that I couldn't increase my Dao Qi when I was searching for the dragon. After reaching the acupoint sealing realm, I studied many spells and grasped the usage of the many artifacts I had. I even experienced many battles. Until today, I still felt that those battles were very helpful to my cultivation. However, after listening to Yi Piampian's words and thinking about it carefully, I realized that I was completely wrong. Based on my 4 meridians talent, when I reached the acupoint sealing realm, my cultivation speed was definitely much faster than others. I had also obtained evidence of this at the very beginning. When I returned to the Shenzhen branch from the Metaphysics Union, I already had 1 chakra's cultivation. Although this was related to the accumulation of 5 Tao Qi light pillars when I was searching for the dragon, reaching 1 chakra's cultivation in just a few days was extremely shocking. However, in the following year, the increase in my Tao Qi was mostly accomplished through the Tao Ghost Seal and the Yin Qi in the Corpse Sect. My own cultivation was minimal. Even though I had many fortuitous encounters, it still dragged on until now. Compared to Yi Piampian's full 6 months, I was still far behind. Cultivation speed was secondary. The most important thing was cultivation comprehension. This was also the main reason why I was feeling heavy. Han Wennan, Zhang Kunlun, Lu Xinyang, and I had reached the acupoint sealing realm at the same time at the previous Young Phoenix gathering. This time, we were going to break through to the glorious knowledge realm at the same time. Although it seemed like we were progressing at the same speed, I knew that I had fallen behind them. It wasn't the cultivation speed that was lagging behind, but the realm. Although I had won against Lu Xinyang yesterday, Lu Xinyang had used the astral steps. Although he had borrowed the power of the obsidian stone, it also meant that he had comprehended star power. Even though Han Wennan and Zhang Kunlun hadn't used the astral steps, it was obvious that they had comprehended star power. In the acupoint sealing realm, the accumulation of Tao Qi was secondary. The most important thing was to prepare for the glorious knowledge. Comprehending star power was the most crucial step. I hadn't comprehended a single bit of star power. Although my cultivation speed hadn't fallen behind, I wasn't sure what would happen when I absorbed the obsidian stone. Although not comprehending star power didn't mean that I couldn't absorb star power to break through to the glorious knowledge realm, I would still be 1 step behind others. It would definitely affect my future cultivation. I couldn't help but smile wryly. If it wasn't for Yi Piampian's reminder, I probably wouldn't have understood this problem. I had already passed the acupoint sealing realm. There was no point in regretting it now. I would just have to pay more attention in the future. Of course, this didn't mean that I would give up on increasing my battle power. After all, danger was everywhere in the pugilistic world. If I didn't have the protection of battle power, I would have died countless times already. There was no need to give up eating for fear of choking. I just had to find a balance between the two in the future. After understanding this logic, I completely agreed with Yi Piampian's point of view on the 5 elements' innate talents. There wasn't much meaning to the amount of innate talents one had, so there was no need to worry about it. When the fatty and I returned to the room at night, the fatty was really excited. He kept asking me how long it would take for me to reach the glorious knowledge realm. He even said that I had suppressed the people from the aristocratic families of metaphysics during the Young Phoenix gathering. I didn't get first place in the competition due to my injuries, so I couldn't let the people from the aristocratic families of metaphysics rise again. When I absorbed the obsidian stone, I had to put in more effort and suppress them again. The fatty was really happy. His words were all about me. However, I understood that what this fellow was really concerned about was what I had said previously, that I would accompany him to the Fire God Temple after reaching the glorious knowledge realm. He had depended on his father since he was young. Their relationship wasn't any less than my relationship with my parents. Even though I didn't say that Uncle Lin had entered the fire god temple, the fatty could probably guess it. The fatty and I had both experienced the death of our parents, so I could completely understand what his father's resurrection meant to the fatty. I could also imagine the torment he was going through during this period of time. This fellow always seemed to be heartless on the surface, but in this world, there was definitely no one who was truly heartless. Chapter 260. The next morning, Yi Piampian came to pick me up and bring me to the Metaphysics Association, since it involved the secrets of cultivation, and I had to stay at the Metaphysics Association to absorb star power from the obsidian stone after the test. I couldn't leave for a short period of time. Thus, the fatty couldn't go with me, and could only stay in the small courtyard to wait for my news. Because of what Yi Piampian had told me yesterday, I was rather relaxed along the way. However, when I arrived at the venue where the Metaphysics Association would test for the 5 elements, I couldn't relax anymore. A dense crowd of people had gathered at the venue. The people from the various metaphysical worlds who had been watching the competition hadn't left. Together with the people from the Metaphysics Association's headquarters, the small venue was filled to the brim. After today, everyone's attention was focused on me. I was a little puzzled. As I walked inside, I asked Yi Piampian, "The 5 elements aren't that important. Why are there so many people here to watch the show?" Yi Piampian also glanced at the crowd with some confusion. She turned her head and explained, "I think those people from the metaphysical families haven't had time to leave yet. You were previously gifted with 4 meridians, so it's normal for these people to stare at you now." I nodded and didn't say anything else. I walked to the center of the venue, where Han Wennan, Zhang Kunlun, and a dozen other people were already waiting. Yi Piampian had previously mentioned that the Metaphysics Association would give out obsidian stones once every 3 months. These people should be all the candidates to break through to the glory of knowledge realm. 9 of them were people he had met in the previous competition, and the remaining few were unfamiliar faces. After I walked over, the people I knew all greeted me. After I returned their greetings, I asked Han Wennan how his injuries were yesterday. He grinned and said in a low, muffled voice, "I'm fine." While we were chatting, President Gu brought a group of people from the Metaphysics Association to the venue. After briefly explaining the 5 elements test today, he called someone from behind and said that he would be in charge of the 5 elements test. I looked up. This person was an old acquaintance. He was Chao Kuo, who had come to pick us up with Yang Shilong when I had first arrived in the capital. At that time, I had only paid attention to him because of Yang Shilong's respectful attitude towards him. I didn't expect to meet him again today. Chao Kuo was a middle-aged man with a thin face. After he walked over, he didn't say much. He just put a box in his hand on the table and carefully took out a foot-long humanoid statue. The statue was completely black, and its design was simple and crude. One could only see the various parts of the human body, and everything else was blurry. Only the eyes on the head seemed to be embedded with 2 transparent pearls. They looked very beautiful and overflowing with color. After putting the statue down, Chao Kuo still didn't say anything. Instead, he sat cross-legged under the statue, pressed his left hand on the statue, and chanted a mysterious incantation. She didn't know what he was doing, but judging from his posture, it was obvious that he wouldn't stop anytime soon. Zhang Kunlun, who was standing to my right, was the first to speak. "The ancient magic has been lost for a long time. Only the great Chao clan's 5 elements testing technique has been passed down. I've yearned for it for a long time, but it's a pity that the great Chao clan's technique has never been passed down to outsiders. Those without the great Chao clan's bloodline are unable to study it. It's a pity." As soon as he finished talking, Han Wennan chimed in, Ancient witchcraft techniques emphasize the most on bloodline inheritance. Moreover, they're very different from the techniques of the future. Even if you find a chance to study them, I'm afraid you won't be able to benefit from them. It'll just be a waste of time. Zhang Kunlun smiled and said, I'm just studying them out of interest. It's not important whether I can benefit from them or not. The two of them were strange. Yesterday, they had fought to the death in the arena, but they weren't polite to each other. However, as soon as they got out of the arena, their relationship returned to normal. There was no ill feeling between them. I was interested in their conversation. I couldn't help but ask, what do you mean by ancient witchcraft and the Great Chao clan? Zhang Kunlun smiled and pointed at Chao Kuo. In this world, only the Chao clan, where Chao Kuo comes from, can test for the 5 elements. This Chao clan is the descendant of the Great Chao clan, one of the 3 sovereigns. When they test for the 5 elements, they use the ancient witchcraft techniques that have been passed down from ancient times. However, these ancient witchcraft techniques have been lost. Only the Chao clan's method to test for the 5 elements' talent has been passed down. His words opened my eyes. Everybody knew that Chinese characters originated from the oracle bones. Before the Shang and Zhou dynasties, there were no written records. There were only legends. I didn't expect that there were ancient witchcraft techniques at that time. No wonder Zhang Kunlun sighed and wanted to find a chance to study them. I couldn't help but feel interested. I hurried to look at Chao Kuo's statue. I wanted to see if there was anything magical about this ancient witchcraft technique. However, after studying for a long time, I couldn't find anything. Chao Kuo kept mumbling something, but the statue didn't look any different. Thump! After a few minutes, Chao Kuo finished chanting the last syllable. Zhang Kunlun, on the other hand, was calm. He grinned and walked down. At that moment, only Han Wennan and I were left. Before I could move, Han Wennan walked over and placed his hands on the statue. Very quickly, the statue's eyes emitted a red light. This meant that Han Wennan only had one of the 5 elements. He wasn't dispirited. Instead, he grinned and nodded at me, gesturing for me to go over. After what Yi Piampian had said yesterday, I wasn't nervous. I smiled and walked over. Following my actions, everyone in the hall quietened down and focused their gazes on me. The fatty was genuinely happy for me. At the same time, he didn't hide the fact that he was urging me to go to the fire god temple. I nodded. My originally gloomy mood somehow improved a little. I grinned at the fatty. All right, I'll probably be able to settle the matters here in 2 to 3 days. We'll depart then. All right. The fatty hammered my shoulder and sat on the edge of the bed happily. He sat cross-legged and started to meditate. He told me that he had to increase his power as soon as possible so that he wouldn't be a burden to me. After saying that, the fatty closed his eyes. Although the experienced faction didn't belong to the mountain range and didn't have any energy in their bodies, they still had their own cultivation methods. The fatty rarely cultivated, but now he finally knew that he had to work hard. Looking at the fatty, I couldn't help but think of myself. I usually knew how to work hard, but now, where was the direction of my hard work? I leaned against the chair and closed my eyes. I tried my best to toss all the negative emotions to the side and started to think about my future path. According to Yi Piampian, there was no possibility of relying on the obsidian stone to reach the glory knowledge realm. Maybe the few hundred or thousands of obsidian stones I mentioned could push me to the glory knowledge realm, but that was just a fantasy, not to mention me. Even the Metaphysics Society wouldn't be able to take out a few hundred or thousands of obsidian stones? If not, why would the 700 to 800 obsidian stones from the fire god temple attract the greed of the metaphysics aristocratic families? After rejecting this path, there was only one way to reach the glory knowledge realm, and that was to not rely on the obsidian stone to comprehend the stars in the sky and absorb the star power to reach the glory knowledge realm. This method was called star picking. It was the path that the ancient almighty beings took when they reached the glory knowledge realm. Compared to relying on the obsidian stone to break through, it was much more powerful and difficult. I wasn't afraid of the difficulty. Although I hadn't experienced many obstacles on the path of cultivation, I was confident that I wasn't any weaker than others in terms of tenacity. It was a pity that the star-picking technique required me to comprehend the star power. Up until now, I hadn't even comprehended the star power, much less the stars. Rather than daydreaming, I might as well seriously consider Nan Gong's suggestion. Even if I couldn't show my face in front of the Sky Master, I could at least maintain my cultivation path. I didn't have to think too much about which was more important. It was just that Nan Gong said that I could only use the star-picking technique to use the dark green glory knowledge. Thus, the same problem was placed in front of me. Without comprehending the star power, how could I pluck the stars? That day, he had even promised that he would definitely be able to successfully pluck the stars using the dark green glory of knowledge. However, that was all he had said. As for the specifics of how to do it, he had not told me at all. This fellow had always been elusive, so where would I be able to find him now? Helpless, I could only give up on the idea of using the glory knowledge in a short period of time. I would take it one step at a time. I would first accompany Fatty to the Fire God Temple to see if I could enter. Then I would wait for Nan Gong to appear before me and ask him about the star-picking technique. After making up my mind, my earlier hesitation disappeared, and I became determined once again. Cultivators respected the heavens and often said that fate was not determined by the heavens. However, this only existed when one was favored by the heavens. Otherwise, there wouldn't be the saying of changing one's fate in the world of metaphysics. In a sense, Tao Chi was the will of the heavens. After choosing the dark green glory knowledge, perhaps my future cultivation path would be reversed. But so what? I didn't have any choice at all. When I woke up the next morning, my previous dispiritedness and depression were all gone. I went to look for Yi Piampian before she came to find me. Seeing me appear in front of her, refreshed, Yi Piampian was confused. However, she quickly cheered up and asked me about my next step. I had already thought about it. I smiled at her and said, although the obsidian is useless to me, I still have to retrieve the 10 obsidian that I obtained from the competition. Then I will accompany Fatty to the Fire God Temple. Oh yeah, the Metaphysics Association found the Fire God Temple. They didn't seal it right. Yi Piampian shook her head. The Fire God Temple occupies a huge area. The Metaphysics Association doesn't have the ability to seal it even if they wanted to. Moreover, it's far away and it can hide on its own. There's no need to seal it. I nodded. I suddenly recalled what Yi Piampian had told me to find Gramps Lee to think of a solution. I asked half-jokingly. Also, didn't you say that you were going to find Gramps Lee to think of a solution? Did you ask him? Yi Piampian was stunned and carefully lifted her head to look at me. Then she stuttered. Gramps Lee wasn't home yesterday. How about I ask him when he comes back today? This lass's cold and arrogant look was getting rarer and rarer. On the contrary, she had the cute and cautious look that Tong Tong had. I laughed and didn't mention it again. I just asked her to go to the Metaphysics Association with me. After the test for the 5 elements yesterday, Today was the day to distribute the obsidian to the Metaphysics Association to break through to the glory of knowledge. I didn't need to worry about the glory of knowledge and only needed to retrieve the obsidian. Yang Shilong didn't doubt him and immediately agreed. Let's go back and prepare. The notary of the Postnatal Metaphysics Association will bring Bai Chiwen there. After we sign the life or death contract, we can have a life or death duel. After we agreed on this matter, Yi Pianpian and I left the Metaphysics Society. On the way back, my mood wasn't affected at all. On the contrary, Yi Pianpian's face was filled with anger. On the way back, she couldn't help but say to me, "The Liu family is really reckless. Last time, I already said that Grandpa Li wanted to take you as his disciple, but they still dared to act rashly. Grandpa Li won't forgive them this time." Oh, her words piqued my interest. Will Mr. Li punish the Liu family this time? Yi Pianpian shook her head dejectedly. After all, the Liu family is just borrowing people. Moreover, they purposely chose someone whose realm is far lower than yours. Even if Grandpa Li finds out, he probably won't say anything. Well, it turned out that she was just talking out of anger. Seeing that Yi Pianpian was still fuming with anger, I was a little moved. I didn't care about this matter, but she cared about it so much. She was probably afraid that the Liu family's actions would hurt my dignity. I smiled at her and wanted to ease her mind, so I purposely joked with her. "Oh, right, Gramps Li wants to take me as his disciple, and you're his grandson, so shouldn't you call me uncle?" Yi Pianpian's anger immediately disappeared. She turned her head and rolled her eyes at me. Then she turned back to continue driving. I chuckled. "If you don't want to call me uncle, you can call me Marshal Uncle." This time, Yi Pianpian didn't even turn her head. She only threw 2 words at me. "Childish." After laughing and joking around, the gloominess from before was swept away. After returning to the courtyard, Yi Pianpian said that she was going to report to Mr. Li, so she directly left. I brought a pile of blazing stones back to my room. After entering, the fatty was still meditating. I didn't disturb him. I just took out the 10 blazing stones and placed them on the table. I pressed my hands on them, wanting to see if I could sense a bit of star power from them. In the end, after trying for a long time, I didn't find anything other than the warm and comfortable feeling of the stones. I finally gave up on the idea of picking stars. I simply picked up the stones and played with them. Looking at these blazing stones, I couldn't help but think of the huge stone tablet I had seen in the Fire God Temple, as well as the words written on it, "East Jun Siming Ing Huishou Exan." Until now, I still didn't understand the meaning behind it. However, I suddenly had a thought. Since this stone tablet was made of blazing stones, it meant that it wasn't ordinary. The words on it also had a special meaning. With Mr. Li's Heavenly Master realm, it was impossible that he didn't think of this. So, why did he break the stone tablet and split it into so many pieces? After thinking for a long time, I still couldn't figure out his meaning. Since I was bored, I decided to play with the 10 pieces of blazing stones in my hands. Originally, I just wanted to give it a try. However, I didn't expect that these 10 blazing stones were really made from one piece of blazing stone. They could be perfectly pieced together. Moreover, after they were pieced together, one side of the stone revealed a complete Ming character. I was shocked. How could there be such a coincidence? There were only 8 words on the stone tablet. According to Yi Pianpian, it was divided into 800 pieces. During the transportation and distribution process, the order would definitely be messed up. Why did the 10 pieces in my hands coincidentally form a single word? Could it be that someone had arranged this on purpose? From all the signs, I was afraid that only Mr. Li could have arranged this. He was the one who had brought the blazing stones back, and he had the highest authority in the Metaphysics Society. It wasn't difficult for him to do this. But what did he want to do? I carefully placed the stone pieces on the table and held the character Fate in front of me. I observed it attentively and tried to find some unusual signs. However, after looking at it for a long time, besides the pain in my eyes, I didn't find anything else. Feeling helpless, I had to put away the blazing stones for the time being. I would slowly study them later. A day passed by in the blink of an eye, and the day of the duel with Bai Chiwen arrived. That morning, Yi Pianpian and I went out together. We didn't go to the Metaphysics Association, but to the back of the mountain near the courtyard. When he arrived, Yang Shilong and Bai Chiwen were already there. Bai Chiwen was still as thin and dark as before. He stood there, without a trace of expression on his face. He probably knew why he had come here. His face was deathly still. Yang Shilong walked over and told me that he had volunteered to be the notary of this life and death duel to prevent the Liu family from secretly planting someone else. As the vice president of the Metaphysics Society, it was normal for him to see through the Liu family's intentions. I smiled and thanked him. Then I took the document from the Metaphysics Society, pressed my fingerprint, and signed it. Bai Chiwen had already signed the documents. After I was ready, he didn't say a word and walked to the flat ground on the mountain peak. I didn't hesitate at all and followed after her. At that moment, Yi Pianpian suddenly pulled me. I turned and saw that Yi Pianpian was frowning. Her expression was solemn. She said to me hesitantly, "Zhou, you be careful." I felt strange. Yi Pianpian knew Bai Chiwen's power very well. This was a duel with a great disparity in power. The one who had to be careful was Bai Chiwen, not me. However, I nodded at her and comforted her. There were even people who had cut their bodies with knives and used their blood to draw symbols on the ground. I hadn't seen those symbols before, but I could recognize that they were some kind of sacrificial ritual. Suddenly, someone shouted in my ear, "It's getting dark. Hurry up and cross the river." I lowered my head and saw that I wasn't standing on a sea, but a river that was so wide that it seemed to have no end. I was suddenly filled with endless fear. I lifted my feet and ran forward. However, even after I was exhausted, I still couldn't see the end of the green water and white flowers. I pointed at the rainbow light in the distance and asked loudly, "How can I cross the river? How can I get there?" The strange voice rang in my ear again. "Wisdom can cross the river, and ignorance can cross the river. Sages can cross the river, and bandits can cross the river. Butchers can cross the river, and dogs can cross the river." Chapter 2, 65. A trace of fear that came from the deepest part of my life suddenly welled up. It slowly and unstoppably occupied my entire body, turning me into a statue. I was panicking. I wanted to run and shout, but I couldn't move my legs or open my mouth. I could only stand there, maintaining a fixed posture. My eyes were fixed on the rainbow light in the sky, as well as the person under the rainbow light. The people who were prostrating on the ground got up. The people who were kneeling in worship got up. Even the people who had sacrificed their blood also got up. They were just like me, their faces filled with fear. But the difference was that they could move. They howled and ran madly, hiding behind the rainbow light. Their eyes trembled as they looked in my direction. I still couldn't move or turn my head, but I could see a black line appear in the sky behind me. It was surging and spreading towards me. Is this what those people are afraid of? I widened my eyes as I wanted to see what was in the darkness. But after looking for a long time, I realized that there was nothing special about the black. It was just the simplest and most ordinary black. It was like the white flower under my feet, pure and transparent. It was the color in the deepest part of a person's dream. The black was extremely fast. I had just seen it in 1 second, but in the next, it was next to me. At that moment, the space behind me was completely shrouded in darkness. I couldn't see anything. Thus, I retracted my gaze and looked at the ground next to me. The light green river water was gone, and the transparent white flower was gone too. I stood there, my body stretching horizontally into a clear straight line. Behind me was the thick darkness of the night, while in front of me was the bright and clear day. At that moment, I finally regained my ability to move. I lifted my trembling feet and took a step forward. The people hiding behind the rainbow light in the distance screamed in unison. I didn't care about them, but lowered my head to look at my side. There was no change from before. The clear straight line was still parallel to my body. I didn't believe it. I lifted my feet and continued to walk. But with every step I took, the darkness behind me followed me. The people in the distance looked even more frightened. If I didn't move, the darkness wouldn't move. Once I walked, the darkness would follow me. I finally knew that I was the darkness. I was confused and scared. I was the darkness. What was the person in the rainbow light? Who were the people kneeling down below? After standing there for a long time, I gritted my teeth and continued to walk forward. The voice had said that I couldn't cross the river. Was I really unable to cross the river? Speaking of which, it was strange. Previously, when I frantically ran forward, I could only see the light green river under my feet. But this time, I only lightly took a few steps forward before my feet stepped on dry land. I looked at the land under my feet and then at the rainbow light in front of me, which was much closer. I had obviously crossed the river. I looked at the land under my feet and then at the rainbow light in front of me. It was obvious that I had crossed the river. They were still hiding behind the rainbow light, but they weren't howling anymore. All of them were staring at me, and the fear on their faces had turned into deep hatred. I didn't know what had happened, and I didn't know what would happen next. My heart palpitated, and my chest felt like it was being torn apart. At this point in the dream, the world seemed to collapse. The sky in the distance suddenly cracked, and a bright beam of light shone into this world. I lifted my head and saw a crimson crescent moon in the sky. The darkness behind me suddenly surged into my body and disappeared. The rainbow light in front of me also disappeared. There was no river, white flowers, or the distant riverbank. I returned to reality from my dream. I was still standing on the flat ground behind the Metaphysics Society's mountain. Not far from me, Bai Chiwen's body was lying on the ground. His tongue was hanging out, and his eyes were wide open. His face was so twisted that I couldn't bear to imagine what kind of cruelty he had endured before his death. Large droplets of sweat rolled down my body, but I didn't bother to wipe them off. I frantically searched my chest. After confirming that my chest wasn't broken, I heaved a sigh of relief and lifted my head to look in front of me. Even though the dream had disappeared, the people who were looking at me in the dream were still there. However, their faces seemed familiar. President Gu, Lu Ziyang, Lu Zining, and a few other strangers were standing with them. There was a total of 10 of them. From their auras and the position they were standing in, it seemed that they were all celestial masters. The light in the surroundings became brighter. The speed at which the solar eclipse disappeared seemed to be much faster than when it first appeared. Under the gazes of the celestial masters, I was sweating profusely again. However, I didn't bother to wipe them off. I lowered my head and closed my eyes to quickly sense the situation in the veins of the sky. The Tao Qi was still sticky and calm in the veins of the sky. There wasn't a single ripple, but the dark green energy that had been mixed with the Tao Qi had sunk to the lowest part of the veins of the sky. It had turned into a small dark green pearl. It looked like the black pearl that Xiao Jin had given me back then, but it was much smaller. After glory of knowledge, the Tao Qi would absorb the power of the stars. It would turn from a liquid state to a solid state and gather together to form a Tao Qi source stone. It was also known as a Tao Qi star. As one's cultivation deepened, the Tao Qi star would grow bigger and split into even more Tao Qi stars. That was how the 7 stars of knowledge came to be. It was the same for the dark green energy. Yes, I had already used glory of knowledge. Even though I had been resisting against using the dark green energy to use glory of knowledge, I had stopped resisting after I realized that I was darkness and had continued to walk forward in that dream. However, I had never expected that I would be in such a situation right now. My face broke into a grin in my extreme fear. Nangong had warned me not to appear in front of the heavenly masters after using the dark green energy, to use glory of knowledge. However, I had just used glory of knowledge, and there were already 10 heavenly masters gathered in front of me. Compared to the absurd dream, just now, the scene in front of him was much scarier. Logically speaking, the solar eclipse would only last a few minutes. Why would the heavenly masters gather here? Did they already know something? The solar eclipse had yet to end, and I couldn't use the Tao Qi. However, looking at the gazes of President Gu and Lu Xiang, I knew what they would do after the solar eclipse ended. What should I do? I suddenly recalled that Nangong had said that I would definitely die if I appeared in front of the heavenly masters. That was under the premise that he wasn't by my side. Where was Nangong? Was he here? I suddenly turned around and looked behind me. I was shocked and surprised. Nangong was really here. Beside him stood Yi Piapian in a white dress, Yi Piampian in a red dress, and Yang Shilong. Yi Piampian and Yang Shilong were dumbfounded while Nangong and Yi Piapian furrowed their brows. They looked anxious and vigilant. The surprise in my heart disappeared. So what if Nangong was here? There were 10 heavenly masters here. I couldn't deny that Nangong's background was mysterious, and he seemed to be very powerful. However, no matter how powerful he was, he couldn't be more powerful than 10 heavenly masters. I lifted my head to look at the sun in the sky. Half of it was already visible, and its color had turned from blood red to gold. The solar eclipse was about to end. Finally, someone spoke. It was the tall and skinny Lu Xiang, who looked like a deity. He smirked coldly. I thought you were a genius from Xianmen. Who knew that you were a remnant of the shaman tribe? I will tear you into pieces today. He didn't even mention Lu Zhenyang. There was only pure hatred on his face. President Gu's voice resounded. I'm useless. I allowed the remnant of the shaman tribe to sneak into the Metaphysics Association and hurt the Lu family's son. I will personally apologize to the Lu family after this. What is a remnant of the shaman tribe? Those who have dark green power in their bodies are from the shaman tribe. Lu Xening quickly added, there hasn't been any appearance of the shaman tribe in the metaphysics world for the past 100 years. This bastard actually managed to cultivate his shaman energy to the glory of consciousness realm. He might have someone else behind him. At the beginning of this year, I killed this bastard's parents, but I didn't investigate further. After this matter is over, I will check on his parents' corpses and all his relatives and friends. I won't let anyone slip through the net. Shaman energy, so the dark green power was called shaman energy. My body shivered as I turned to look in the direction of Grandpa Li's courtyard. I didn't see anyone. I couldn't help but smile. Riley. President Gu was standing next to Lu Xiang. Grandpa Li was from the Metaphysics Association, after all. He probably wouldn't help me this time, right? I never expected that the dark green power would force me to such a state. However, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. After the test of the 5 elemental talents, there was no room for me to continue on the path of Tao energy. I only had 2 choices. I could either stop at the pressure point realm for the rest of my life or choose the dark green power. Even though I was hesitant, I already knew what decision I would make in the end. The sun in the sky was already half out, leaving only a narrow crescent in the darkness. The Tao energy in my body started to move. It wasn't like a puddle of stagnant water anymore, but it started to flow. How many more minutes? Or a few seconds? There was no need for me to try and escape in front of the 10 heavenly masters. Grandpa Li still didn't show any intention of appearing. I retracted my gaze and closed my eyes, waiting patiently. Zhou-yi. At that moment, I suddenly heard someone calling my name. I suddenly opened my eyes and looked behind me. Yi Marolan, who was dressed in white, suddenly ran towards me. Behind her, Nan Gong was hurriedly saying something to Yi Pianpian. Not long after, Yi Pianpian gritted her teeth and seemed to have made up her mind. She followed Yi Marolan and ran towards me. What do they want to do? Before I could understand, President Gu, who was among the 10 heavenly masters, shouted, "Vice President Yi, what do you want to do? Hurry up and retreat." Yi Pianpian and Yi Marolan didn't pay any attention to me and continued to run towards me. They only stopped when they reached the middle of me and the 10 heavenly masters. They stood facing each other, their hands clasped together as they muttered something. Right at that moment, the Tao energy in my body suddenly seemed to break free from some kind of restriction and quickly flowed through the veins of the sky. I raised my eyes to look at the sky. There was no longer a shadow on the sun. The solar eclipse had ended. The 10 heavenly masters, who had been prepared for a long time, didn't hesitate anymore. They all raised their hands. In a flash, a pure and explosive Taoist chi rose from that side, sweeping up the dust and dirt on the ground. It was like a violent whirlwind that surged towards me. In the blink of an eye, Yi Pianpian and Yi Maolan's figures were swallowed by the terrifying Tao energy. However, after the 2 of them disappeared, a sparkling little bird suddenly appeared in their place. It had 1 red wing and 1 white wing. With a soft chirp, it flew to my side at a speed even faster than the gust of Tao energy. With a dive, it disappeared into my arms. At the same time, the fire obsidian stone that I had been carrying in my bosom suddenly fell to my feet. The 10 stones seemed to be rapidly pieced together by an invisible hand. The word life on the stone was clearly revealed and emitted a dazzling red light. I suddenly felt a tearing pain from my body. My entire body was enveloped by the red light. I couldn't see anything other than a patch of red in front of my eyes. The red light was extremely scorching, and I had no choice but to tightly close my eyes. Immediately after, my entire body was thrown into the air. My body seemed to be in a weightless state as I floated and spun. My head was dizzy, and my chest was filled with the urge to vomit. At the same time, I heard a clear and melodious voice softly singing a ballad. I blame the young master for being melancholic and forgetting to go home. I miss you and can't be idle. The person in the mountain is fragrant and fragrant. I drink the stone spring in the shade of the pine, and cypress thunder fills the sky, and the rain is dark. The ape chirps in the night. The wind rustles, and the trees rustle. I miss the young master for being separated. I blame the young master for being melancholic and forgetting to go home. I miss the young master for being separated. I miss the young master for being separated after an unknown amount of time, the ballad's voice became softer and softer. The red light that enveloped me finally disappeared. My body suddenly fell. Back then, when I went out to accompany you for a year, I had already used up many years of my cultivation. Now, I no longer have the strength to go out. However, if my husband needs me, I can go out with you for a day within a year. Prohibition? I didn't understand. Who gave you the ban? The red shadow shook its head again. This is the rule of the heavenly Tao. I am originally a Yin soul, so the heavenly Tao has its own restrictions. I cannot easily overstep them. I nodded as I understood what she meant. However, I couldn't help but ask about her cultivation realm. There was no doubt that the red shadow's cultivation was very high. It could be seen from many things that happened in the past. However, I had not yet stepped onto the path of cultivation, so I could not see everything clearly. At this moment, the red shadow said that it was the heavenly Tao's restriction. However, no matter what it was, it only restricted the weak. After reaching a certain realm, one could break these restrictions. The red shadow told me that she was at the Yin soul ghost immortal realm, which was equivalent to the heavenly master realm. This result wasn't beyond my expectation. Li Ying's Yin soul had a cultivation base close to the Ghost King's, so the cultivation base of the living corpse that year should be even higher. The red shadow only needed to lift the veil to make him kneel. It was enough to prove that the red shadow's cultivation base was much higher than hers. When I thought about Li Ying, many things emerged in my head, including the fatty's father, Liang Tianxin of the ghost-raising sect, the 28 fiendish Yellow Springs formation, and that underground palace. I couldn't help but ask all my questions. This time, the red shadow didn't keep silent. She told me everything. I thought that the red shadow had resurrected the fatty's father, but she denied it. She said that she didn't have the power to interfere with the heavenly Tao. The reason why the fatty's father had been resurrected was because of a strange item in the underground palace. However, the red shadow didn't tell me what that item was. She only told me that if there was a chance, she would take me there to see it. That year, after the fatty's father came back to life with that strange item, he stayed in the underground palace for a while. After practicing some spells, he left the underground palace. Before he left, he asked me to give him the red handkerchief. Speaking of the red handkerchief, I recalled that poem. Even though I was a member of the metaphysics world, I still found that prophetic poem inconceivable. I couldn't help but ask, "Did you write that poem?" The red shadow hesitated for a while, then answered, "Yes and no." I was confused. However, before I could ask further, the red shadow said, "Husband, I can't tell you about this for the time being." She was straightforward, so I didn't want to ask further. I nodded and skipped this topic. I continued to listen to her question. The red shadow had never seen Liang Tianxin, the elder of the ghost-raising faction. I guessed she had never entered the underground palace. As for Li Ying's soul, the red shadow told me that after the underground palace was sealed, she had expelled the old principal skeleton and left Li Ying's living corpse to guard the entrance. Several years later, she found that Li Ying's living corpse had disappeared. The red shadow didn't know if she had run away on her own or if she had been detained. However, since she hadn't found anything, I guessed that Li Ying had run away on her own. The red shadow only remembered that a person who raised ghosts had set up the 28 fiend Yellow Springs formation dozens of years ago. His purpose seemed to be to lure the underground palace out. The red shadow had never stopped him, so she didn't have a deep memory of it. In the end, she told me that I was in the underground palace that year. However, I wasn't in her residence. I was in another place in the underground palace. The red shadow said that the underground palace was mystical and huge. Even she hadn't been to all of the places. She had come here today because she had followed the instructions in the poem. She had come here to wait for me. I was a little surprised. In that poem, there was a hint about why I would be here today. I didn't understand, but the red shadow didn't have any reason to lie to me. Perhaps there was something that I couldn't see. Since we had met, I kept asking questions. I didn't have time to care about the pain in my body. At this moment, my doubts were slightly relieved, but the pain in my body exploded again. I couldn't help but sit on the ground. Previously, after the appearance of the Luoho star and the dark green energy, star plucking glory of knowledge, those 10 celestial masters besieged me. Although they did not manage to hit me in the end, the chi of Tao that was like a wild wind still caused me to be severely injured. Moreover, in the process of leaving that place and appearing in this place, I felt my body being torn and pulled several times. My injuries worsened significantly. Just now, because of the joy of meeting again after a long time, I did not care about my injuries. The red shadow gently supported me to the side of a stone bed and had me lie down. Then, she brought me a bowl of cold medicine that seemed to have been prepared beforehand. She made me drink it. Then, just like when we had first met, she gently massaged my body. Neither of us spoke, but the indescribable silence made me feel very comfortable. I closed my eyes and thought back to the life and death battle with Bai Chiwen, to the time when I was surrounded by the 10 heavenly masters. The first people I thought of were Yi Pianpian and Yi Maolan. Chapter 267. After thinking about it for a long time, I still couldn't understand why the fatty would do that. However, I didn't suspect the fatty. We had known each other since we were young. After spending so much time together, I didn't suspect that the fatty would harm me on purpose. I just couldn't understand why he didn't tell me about it. As I thought about it, the bowl of medicine that I had just drunk started to take effect. I felt warm in my abdomen, and I felt sleepy. I didn't have the energy to think about anything else. Soon, I fell asleep. When I woke up, I didn't know how much time had passed. When I opened my eyes, the red shadow was still sitting on the edge of the bed. Seeing that I had woken up, she gently asked, "Husband, are you feeling better?" My body moved slightly. The tearing pain from yesterday had disappeared. After I got off the bed and stood up, I tried to move the Taoist energy and the dark green power in my body. It didn't slow down at all. I couldn't help but be amazed by the medicine that the red shadow had fed me yesterday. The effect was too good. After asking, the red shadow told me that the bowl of medicine was made of mystical-ine liquid. It was a liquid that was produced in a mystical-ine place in the underground palace. It was very magical. It had the effect of calming the nerves and stabilizing the soul. It also had a miraculous effect on Taoist energy. Then, the red shadow picked up a small jade bottle and handed it to me. She gently said, "There is a bottle of mystical-ine liquid in it. When you want to take it, you only need to pour 1 or 2 drops of it into the water according to the severity of your injury. Husband, when you go out this time, you can avoid some disasters. Keep it with you for emergencies." Her words surprised me. I asked guiltily, "You knew that I was going out?" The red shadow didn't blame me. She gently said, "Husband, you have an unfinished business in this world. Of course, you can't stay here for a long time. I also want to go out with you, but I can't escape the ban." She was right. Yesterday, when I had asked her if I could go out, I had already planned to go out. I also wanted to stay with the red shadow for a long time. However, there were some things that I couldn't let go of. Luckily, the red shadow didn't restrict me in any way. This made me feel much more relaxed. However, I suddenly thought of another problem. I worriedly asked, "Is she always here?" No matter when I come back, she's always here. After getting confirmation from the red shadow, I finally calmed down. After I felt better, I had the mood to walk around and observe the surroundings. The red shadow had told me that this place was part of the underground palace. However, when I lifted my head and looked around, I didn't see the luminous pearls that were as bright as the stars in the night sky. There was also bright light here, but the light source was the faint red light emitted by the surrounding walls. Chapter 268. Lift the Veil. When the red shadow had called me husband for the first time, I had happily accepted this kind of relationship. Even before that, I had been longing to see the face under the veil. I didn't know how many times I had thought of removing the veil. However, I had always been scared. I always thought that the red shadow was just an illusion, so I didn't dare to talk about it. Moreover, in the underground palace, the red shadow had only lifted the veil, but it had shattered the old principal's skeleton and made Li Ying's walking corpse kneel and kowtow. I suspected that the red shadow's veil had something to do with her cultivation base. For example, the veil could hide her aura. That was why I didn't dare to talk about it. I didn't expect that the red shadow would proactively talk about it today. I was so happy that I had forgotten all my worries. I raised my right hand and pinched the lower edge of the red veil. The red shadow stood still. Although I couldn't see her face, I could feel that she was shy. She looked like an ordinary bride who had just gotten married. I took a deep breath. My trembling hand lifted the veil, and the red shadow's face appeared in front of me for the first time. Her neck was long, and her skin was white. Her skin was white, and she looked beautiful. Her hair was in a bun, and her eyebrows were straight. Her lips were red, and her teeth were white. Her eyes were bright and kind, and she looked elegant. She looked calm and elegant. She was tender and charming, and her words were charming. The red shadow was extremely beautiful, just like what I had imagined in my dreams. She was just like the goddess Luo that Chao Zijian had met by the Luo River. She had told me that she was a ghost. However, I couldn't see any trace of coldness on her face. I could only see a gentle smile. The red shadow gently looked at me, just like how she used to sit by my bed every night. I grinned. My right hand let go of her veil, but I didn't take it back. I slowly slid my hand down to her cheek. Before today, I had always thought that the red shadow was just an illusion. But now, when I gently touched her cheek, I felt a strong sense of reality. The red shadow was here, right in front of me. She wasn't the shadow that would only appear by my bed at night. I smiled and asked her, "Sister, what's your name?" The red shadow didn't seem to be used to my touch. It shook its head slightly, as though it wanted to avoid my touch. However, it didn't move in the end. It just lowered its head slightly and said softly, "Ruffian." I was bewildered when I heard this word. If I hadn't majored in ancient Chinese, I wouldn't have understood it. Not only was it tranquil, but it was also like dancing in the human world. Her figure was graceful, refined, and beautiful, like a goddess floating in the air. Curious about her surname, I asked, "Is your surname Li?" The red shadow shook its head. "I don't have a surname. I'm just called by." Xiao Jin's big head appeared in my field of vision. He happily swam toward me. I couldn't help but feel relieved. It seemed Xiao Jin hadn't forgotten about me. Xiao Jin was really fast. In just a few seconds, he had reached the shore next to me from the center of the river. A few strands of his thick hair that were connected to the corpses on his head floated in front of me and gently touched my shoulder. I quickly squatted down and gently scratched Xiao Jin's head a few times. Xiao Jin seemed to enjoy it. He squinted his eyes and revealed a human-like smile. After helping him for a while, I sat down by the river and told Xiao Jin about the corpse sex method of refining a corpse puppet. Then I asked him if he was willing to be my corpse puppet. Although Xiao Jin couldn't communicate with me, I knew he could understand me. It turned out that Xiao Jin could understand me. However, it was beyond my expectation that after listening to me, Xiao Jin would laugh like a human. His head bobbed up and down in the water, and his hair fluttered in the wind. He looked very excited. I also grinned. Although Xiao Jin had always been kind to me, after refining a corpse puppet, Xiao Jin had become my tool. Sometimes I could even control his life and death. I didn't think that he would agree so quickly. However, he seemed to be even more impatient than I was. This time, I didn't have any more doubts. I took out the materials I had prepared for refining the corpse puppets. I took a deep breath and sat by the river to start the refining ceremony. Chapter 269. The corpse sex corpse refining technique had 3 steps. The first step was to remove the 3 souls. The second step was to infiltrate the corpse with yin energy. The third step was to carve a refining formation on the corpse. After the third step, the corpse would continue to be nourished with yin energy. When the corpse stood up, it would become a corpse puppet. This was the most accurate record of the corpse puppet refining technique in the corpse sex cultivation technique. However, this method was only suitable for ordinary corpses. It wasn't suitable for Xiao Jin, the so-called heavenly Tao corpse. First of all, Xiao Jin wasn't a human, so the 3 souls and 7 spirits weren't suitable for him. Second, Xiao Jin's yin energy was much more than my Tao energy and shaman energy. Thus, infiltrating the corpse with yin energy wasn't suitable. After pondering for a while, I decided to give up on the first 2 steps. From the results, the first 2 steps of the corpse refining technique were used to cultivate the corpse into a suitable material for refining. Xiao Jin was a life form that far surpassed human beings. I wasn't sure if he was suitable for refining a corpse puppet, but I was sure that the success rate of refining a corpse wouldn't be higher than keeping Xiao Jin in his original state. After thinking it through, I directly started to carve the refining formation on Xiao Jin's body. However, I encountered a problem while carving the formation. According to the corpse sex cultivation technique, the caster's blood essence and Tao energy were needed to carve the formation. However, besides Tao energy, I also had shaman energy, and Xiao Jin's power was also shaman energy. After thinking for a while, I decided to give up on using Tao energy and directly use shaman energy. For ordinary corpses, whether they were refined corpses or corpse puppets, the essence of their power was still Tao energy. That was why they needed to carve the formation with Tao energy. However, Xiao Jin and I cultivated shaman energy, so using Tao energy to carve the formation wouldn't be very useful. I stood up and patted my chest. 3 drops of blood essence that contained my original power flew out of my mouth. I carefully caught them and forced the shaman energy in my body to fuse with the blood essence. Then I dipped my index finger in the blood essence and carefully smeared it on Xiao Jin's body. The sacrificial formation was extremely profound and complicated. Fortunately, there was no requirement for the size of the formation. Otherwise, with the size of Little Gold's head, not to mention its entire body, I would have to use up all the blood in my body just to fill up its head. Inscribing a formation was like writing a talisman, and it was definitely a very difficult process. Not to mention that the entire process was extremely exhausting. It must not be stopped in the middle, otherwise all the previous efforts would be wasted. Please move aside and let me out. As he spoke, a rumbling sound came from the river. I had seen the huge, heavenly corpse in the corpse insect. Little Gold's body wasn't smaller than him. I hurriedly retreated, As soon as I left the riverbank, Little Gold seemed to be very anxious. His huge body suddenly jumped out of the river, creating a large splash that hit the riverbank. After I had run far away, I stopped and lifted my head to look at him. Although I already knew that Little Gold's body was very big, I was still scared when I saw him. The heavenly corpse from the corpse insect was already very big, but Little Gold's body was even bigger. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was like a small mountain. Looking at Little Gold, I had the same feeling as watching Ultraman in the anime when I was young. I was dumbfounded. Before I came here, I had planned to put Little Gold in the jade bracelet. I had asked the Red Shadow, although Little Gold wasn't a ghost. He had thick energy. Moreover, he was very powerful. It shouldn't be a problem for him to live in the jade bracelet. However, Little Gold's current body was so big that even the Red Shadow's underground palace couldn't fit him. How could the jade bracelet hold him? While I was frowning, Xiao Jin was exceptionally happy. He stood there and jumped a few times. The sound of his feet hitting the ground was as loud as thunder, spreading far away and echoing in the distant mountains. While I was worried that such a big commotion would attract the people of the Metaphysics Society, Little Gold suddenly sat cross-legged by the riverbank. He lifted his head to look at the bright moonlight in the sky. I wanted to ask him what he was doing, but Little Gold's body suddenly emitted thick white smoke. When the white smoke dispersed, I gawked. Little Gold, who was as big as a small mountain, had disappeared into thin air. No, he didn't just disappear. He had turned into a child. His golden head and fluttering black hair were still there, but his height had shrunk to around 1 meter. He had shrunk dozens of times. Little Gold didn't look scary anymore. Quite the contrary. He looked like a porcelain doll that had been plated with a layer of gold. He looked very cute. What's going on? I hurried to ask him. Little Gold timidly got up from the ground and walked to me. He lowered his voice and said, "There's a restriction on my body. I can only return to my original form on the 2nd day of the Lunar New Year. Moreover, I can only do it for 1 hour each time." I nodded and asked, "Every time you show yourself on the river, is that when you return to your original form? What about the corpses that float out?" Little Gold nodded. Those corpses float out from the bottom of the river periodically. Since I'm imprisoned here, I have to absorb the energy from those corpses to maintain my energy. Imprisoned? Who could imprison Little Gold? If I'm imprisoned, why did he come out now? Chapter 270. The Huangquan River wasn't far from the Shenangjia scenic area. Xiao Jin and I walked for half a day before we reached the outer area of the scenic area. Although Xiao Jin was only 1 meter tall, his golden head and fluttering hair looked strange. If ordinary people saw him, they would be frightened. I stopped on the road outside the scenic area and took out the jade bracelet. "Xiao Jin, can I enter the bracelet?" Xiao Jin didn't take the jade bracelet. He shook his head and said, "Except for 2 days, I don't have any power. I can't go in." I was dumbfounded. Along the way, I had been thinking about how to take Xiao Jin to trouble the Lu family. Now, it was all for naught. With Xiao Jin's power, it wasn't a problem to deal with a celestial master. However, the Lu family had 4 celestial masters. Even if I took advantage of Xiao Jin's recovery time to go to the Lu family, I wouldn't be able to take advantage of them. It was even more impossible to find a celestial master of the Lu family when he was alone. Xiao Jin could only recover his power for 2 hours a month. The probability of encountering a celestial master of the Lu family during this time was similar to the probability of me becoming a celestial master overnight. I forced a smile and gave up on this shortcut to take revenge. I thought for a while and asked Xiao Jin, if he's out of the imprisonment formation, why is his power still confined? When I asked this, Xiao Jin's eyes showed fear. He anxiously crossed his hands and shook his head. I still have Master's seal in my body. Master? In that case, the imprisonment formation that Xiao Jin mentioned before was probably set up by this so-called master, right? However, I didn't understand why Xiao Jin kept calling me master. Did he have another master before this? I couldn't help but ask, but Xiao Jin didn't want to talk about it. I sighed and buried my doubts in my heart. Little Gold's strength was already so strong. So the person who could imprison Little Gold and be called master by Little Gold must be an incredibly strong existence. Even if Little Gold told me, I wouldn't be able to help him. There was no difference between knowing and not knowing. When I was about to put away the jade bracelet and find some clothes for Xiao Jin to wear, Xiao Jin suddenly exclaimed. He pointed at the jade bracelet and asked me, "There's something in there that can help me resist the seal in my body." Something in the jade bracelet? I tried to recall the things I had taken into the jade bracelet. There were the true dragon vein, the well ghost Li Ying's soul, the black cocoon made of the pupil, and many yin souls. Goldie has a lot of yin qi. Is it referring to the ghosts in the jade bracelet? With that in mind, I took the well demon out. However, after a few days, his body didn't change at all. According to him, his power was proportional to his body. From his current appearance, it was obvious that his power hadn't increased. I checked the true dragon veins situation in the jade bracelet. It didn't look much different from before. I understood now that Little Gold's help was a slow process. I was afraid that it would take several months or even several years for it to take effect. I sighed. Actually, I should have thought of this long ago. It was just that I still had the illusion of letting Xiao Jin recover his power in a single night. Now that my illusion was shattered, I shook my head and didn't think about it anymore. I started to think about what I should do next. My original plan was to sneak into the capital after everything went well with Little Gold. On the one hand, I wanted to find out what had happened after I left. On the other hand, I wanted to take revenge on the Liu family. But now I couldn't do that. I had to put the Liu family's grudge aside. There were two things I needed to do. One was to find information about the fatty, Yi Pian, and the others. The other was to find a place to stay. After thinking about it for a while, I decided to go back to Shenzhen. At this moment, among the people I trusted the most, there were two who wouldn't betray me. They were Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda. Both of them had the restriction formation pupil had set in their bodies. Their lives were in my hands. In terms of safety, the feng shui metaphysics shop that I had asked them to take care of was absolutely safe. On the other hand, there would definitely be some rumors in the metaphysics society after what had happened to me that day. The Shenzhen branch wouldn't have as much information as the one in the capital, but it was safer. Moreover, I just wanted to confirm the safety of the fatty, Yi Pian, and the others. It shouldn't be a secret. After making up my mind, I didn't stay any longer. I brought Little Gold with me and bought 2 long-distance bus tickets that didn't require an ID card. Then I went to Shenzhen directly. When I arrived, I contacted Wang Yongjun. Wang Yongjun was close to the people in the metaphysics world. Perhaps he would get some information about me, but he was a businessman after all. Even if he knew something, he wouldn't choose to offend me without any benefits. Indeed, Wang Yongjun was as enthusiastic as before. When he knew that I was going to the feng shui shop, he immediately contacted Wang Kuan to pick me up. He even said that he hadn't seen me for a long time and that he would host a banquet for me. However, I refused. Not long after I waited at the bus stop, Wang Kuan drove over and picked me up. On the way to the shop, he kept reporting to me about the situation of the shop in the past 6 months. When the feng shui shop was established, Wang Yongjun had sent Wang Kuan over to help take care of the business. I hadn't been here for a long time, so he was in charge of everything in the shop. Of course, he had to report everything to me. I had a headache listening to him on the way. In the end, I waved my hand and smiled wryly. I told Wang Kuan, from now on, he can do as he sees fit in the shop. Just make sure the accounts are clear, and you don't need to report anything else to me. Wang Kuan knew what kind of person I was. He grinned and didn't say anything. Soon, I arrived at the shop. Lu Chuanda and Xie Chenghua had already gotten the news. They were waiting for me at the door. After entering, I sat down and casually asked them about the situation of the shop in the past 6 months. Unlike the financial situation that Wang Kuan had just reported, Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda were both people from the metaphysics world. The moment they opened their mouths, they talked about who had been to the shop, what had happened, what talismans they had requested, what evil spirits they had gone to resolve, and so on. I listened to them with great interest. I didn't feel impatient at all. After talking for a long time, I asked them, "Have you encountered anything troublesome in the past 6 months?" Chapter 271. Xie Chenghua told me that in the half a year since the store opened, there were 2 troublesome matters. The first time was not long after the store opened. A hunchbacked old lady with a head full of white hair suddenly appeared. She stood at the door and didn't come in. She pointed at a talisman in the cabinet and asked for the price. At the start, Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda didn't care. After casually stating the price, the hunchbacked old lady nodded and said that she wanted to buy it. But just as Xie Chenghua was about to take out the talisman, the old lady asked if there were any other talismans in the same set as this one. This time, Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda's expressions turned cold. The talisman that the hunchbacked old lady was talking about was the little deception talisman that I left behind. Normal people definitely wouldn't be able to tell that it was a set of purple talismans. Even people in the metaphysics world wouldn't be able to tell. Adding on the fact that the old lady kept standing at the door and refused to come in, people couldn't help but suspect her origins. Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda were both in the glory of knowledge realm, so they naturally had such knowledge. After looking at one another, Lu Chuanda went over to talk to the hunchbacked old lady. As for Xie Chenghua, he stood at the side and secretly opened his heaven eye to look at the old lady. With just one look, Xie Chenghua's mouth gaped. This hunchbacked old lady really wasn't human, but an old fox with white hair. Mountain spirits and wild monsters weren't foreign to people in the metaphysics world, and they weren't afraid of them. But for mountain spirits and wild monsters to transform, they had to reach the Sky Master realm. Of course, this old lady wasn't a Sky Master. There were many mountain spirits and wild monsters, and some of them were talented and had special abilities. For example, the fox race only needed to reach the glory of knowledge realm to transform into a human. Although the glory of knowledge realm was rare, compared to the Sky Master realm, it was much easier. Take the Metaphysics Society, for example. There were only a few people in the Sky Master realm. However, in the glory of knowledge realm, there were at least hundreds and thousands of branch presidents in the country, along with the directors in the headquarters. Therefore, the probability of fox race transforming into a human was much higher than other monsters. This was also why there were many records of fox spirits in the unofficial histories. If it was just an old fox in the glory of memory realm, Xie Chenghua would not be so surprised. What really surprised him was that in the eyes of this old woman's fox true form, there was a large star that almost completely completely filled up the two pupils. The starlight in the pupils was the sign of the glory of consciousness realm. However, for feng shui masters like Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda, who had average talent and relied on obsidian stones to barely advance to glory of consciousness and had almost no hope of advancing further, the starlight in the pupils was so dim that it could not be seen at all. As long as there was starlight in the pupils that could be seen with the naked eye, it meant that this person had extremely strong talent and had the hope of breaking through to the celestial master realm. I had seen many people with starlight in their pupils, such as Yi Pianpian, Zhang Canwen, and Yang Shilong. Yi Pianpian and Zhang Canwen were both in the middle stage of glory of consciousness, and the starlight was almost half the size of their pupils. Yang Shilong was in the perfected glory of consciousness, very close to the heavenly master realm, and the starlight almost filled his pupils. Gremlins were the same as feng shui masters. This hunchbacked old woman clearly had the cultivation of perfected glory of consciousness and was only one step away from becoming a heavenly master. With this kind of strength, even if Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda worked together, they would not be a match for this hunchbacked old woman. What was even more troublesome was that when Xie Chenghua opened his celestial eye to peek, the hunchbacked old woman turned her head to look at him, obviously noticing his little action. Spirits and monsters, once they took human form, hated it the most when others peeped at their true form. Xie Chenghua's face immediately turned pale with fright, but the strange thing was that the old woman only glanced at him once before turning her head away, as if she didn't care, and only continued to ask about the talisman. This time, Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda did not dare to be disrespectful in the slightest, and carefully introduced the little heaven deception talisman to the old woman. After knowing that there was no other set of talismans, the old woman asked about the person who had made the talisman. Xie Chenghua and the others also didn't dare to hide anything, and told her about my situation. They also said that I had gone on a long journey and was not sure when I would return. The old woman seemed to have a good temper. After asking about the situation, she took the little heaven deception talisman with a smile and found a place to stay nearby. Every day, she would come for a stroll, saying that she would wait for me to return. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed, and the old woman still came every day, rain or shine, to take a look. After listening to Xie Chenghua's story, I furrowed my eyebrows. Although this old woman that had taken human form seemed to be very reasonable, her cultivation was too high. After all, if I was the slightest bit careless, I would be in big trouble. Among the people that I knew, the only one that had reached this realm was Yang Shilong. Lu Chuanda was a little confused. He wanted to argue with the deputy bureau chief, but before he could speak, the deputy bureau chief explained the case to him. After listening, Lu Chuanda immediately shut up. According to the deputy bureau chief with the surname Zhang, the suspect, Yufuda, was a farmer entrepreneur in the suburbs of Shenzhen. He contracted thousands of acres of orchard. His family's property was quite solid, and he had dozens of workers under him. At the beginning of this case, the workers in the orchard went missing. When the police received the case, 6 workers had already gone missing. When the case was finally solved, the number of missing workers had reached 19. These 19 workers were finally found in a secret cellar in the orchard. None of them were alive. All of them were dead. 19 lives at once. This kind of case was enough to shock the whole country. What was more serious was that when the police found the cellar, they went in to take a look. All 19 corpses were dismembered. Other than the heads and limbs that were tanned and hung on the wall, the other body parts were cut into pieces of meat. The corpse oil on the surface of the body was all baked out and made into dozens of wrist-thick corpse wax, which was lit around the cellar. Everyone's blood was even released. After mixing it with saltpeter and other substances, it was stored in a pool. The scene was bloody and horrifying. Chapter 272. After the police cleaned up the scene, they found that the corpses were not complete. To be precise, among the 19 corpses, 3 heads, 5 sets of internal organs, 9 left arms, and all the fingers of the left hand were missing. In addition, among the collected body parts, the police found that some were barbecued or cooked. There were also a few small bones scattered around the corners of the cellar. Judging from these signs, the suspect, Yufuda, not only killed and dismembered the corpses, but he also likely ate human flesh. However, after putting these small bones together, they could only identify some of the fingers, but the other missing parts could not be identified. After cleaning up the cellar, the police began to chase after Yufuda. This process was much simpler than expected, and it did not take much effort at all. A large number of armed policemen came to Yufuda's house, and without any resistance, they directly arrested him. However, in the following interrogation, Yufuda did not say a word, but just sat there in a daze. Combined with the case and the suspect's behavior, the police were very suspicious of Yufuda's mental state. They specifically looked for experts in psychopharmacology and criminal psychology, but after a series of examinations, Yufuda was completely normal. Unable to pry open Yufuda's mouth, the police had to continue a carpet search, trying to find clues on their own. This process was unexpectedly smooth. The first time the police searched, they made a huge discovery in Yufuda's house. Yufuda's residence was in the orchard. It was a small 2-story villa, and there was an attic above the 2 stories. The police's major discovery was in this attic. Speaking of this, Deputy Bureau Chief Zhang, who was calm when he talked about the murder and dismembered corpses, had an obvious palpitation on his face. His fingers kept shaking, and he lit a cigarette. After taking a few deep breaths, he continued to narrate. Yufuda's attic was not big, about 10 square meters. At the end was a shrine, but there were no statues of immortals or ancestral tablets. There were only some messy lines drawn on the wall, vaguely like the outline of a bird. From the dark red color on it, these lines were obviously drawn with human blood. Below the murals of human blood, there was a small bronze cauldron placed against the wall. Inside the cauldron was some dark red liquid that looked like blood sliding down the wall. In front of the shrine, there was a large sacrificial table with incense, candles, and offerings on it. Because of what they saw in the cellar, the police could tell at a glance that these candles were the same as the candles in the cellar. They were also corpse wax, and the pieces of meat on the plate below were needless to say. All of them were human flesh. However, the pieces of meat here were different from the ones in the cellar. All of them were cooked. Some were cut into thin slices, and some were boiled into broth. When the police entered, they could even smell a rich aroma. Apart from that, there were 7 heads placed neatly on both sides of the table. From the looks of it, they were all children less than 10 years old. In front of the sacrificial table, there were 7 children's corpses hanging on both sides of the wall. These corpses were almost the same height and weight. All of them were neatly cut in half from the middle and hung on both sides of the wall. On the empty ground in the middle of the attic, there was only a simple praying mat. Around the praying mat, there were 3 heads with shaved hair. They were the 3 missing heads in the cellar. Beside the praying mat, there was a porcelain bowl with half a bowl of minced meat in it. There was also a spoon in it, and there were obvious signs of food being eaten on the edge of the bowl. There were more than a dozen corpses in the attic, but unlike the cellar, this place was clean and tidy, without a trace of the smell of blood. All the corpses had been processed with spices and saltpeter, and even the offerings on the sacrificial table were cooked very beautifully. But compared to the bloody cellar, this clean attic was more depressing and frightening. Almost none of the police officers who handled the case dared to go in to deal with it. Even the old forensic doctor, who had many years of experience, became pale after going in and vomited all over the ground when he came out. This time, the police spent more than a week cleaning up the scene. Finally, after the forensic doctor's appraisal, most of the corpses of the 19 workers in the orchard were found, and the child corpses in the attic were related to another extraordinarily large case of children going missing across provinces. Apart from that, what was even more frightening was that one of the 14 children's heads belonged to the suspect, Yufuda's youngest grandson, Yu Jiaxuan. After appraisal, the half-bowl of minced meat next to the futon was also made from Yu Jiaxuan's corpse. Then, the police extracted Yu Fuda's gastric juice. Although it had been a long time, and nothing was found in the gastric juice from the signs of food being eaten on the edge of the bowl, all the police officers involved in the case knew what had happened. After explaining the whole case, Deputy Bureau Chief Zhang told Lu Chuanda that he had personally interrogated Yu Fuda. This person was just an ordinary-looking old man with a rather rich family. Although he was not a member of the metaphysics community, he did not even need any appraisal to be sure that this person was definitely bewitched. It was just that this case had too many implications, and Yu Fuda was too dangerous. Even the police officers who were interrogating him did not dare to stay in the same interrogation room alone with him. The leaders of the public security system were considering not interrogating him or making criminal deductions and directly executing him. Therefore, it was impossible for Lu Chuanda to come out at this time to do some metaphysics appraisal. In the end, Deputy Bureau Chief Zhang even made Lu Chuanda sign a confidentiality agreement, forbidding him from spreading this matter. After listening to the whole story, Lu Chuanda had long given up on the idea of doing this business. However, before he left, he still couldn't suppress the curiosity in his heart. He revealed his identity as the former president of Foshan Metaphysics Branch and requested to meet Yu Fuda. Originally, the suspect of such a shocking case would definitely not let anyone meet him. However, perhaps the police also wanted to understand the whole case more deeply through people from the metaphysics community. After Deputy Bureau Chief Zhang applied to the higher-ups, he received a positive reply and brought Lu Chuanda to the detention center, where Yu Fuda was temporarily detained. According to Deputy Bureau Chief Zhang's previous introduction, after Yu Fuda was brought to the case, he had been very indifferent. He did not speak or show any expression. Even when he went to identify the scene and saw the corpses, including his little grandson, his expression did not change at all. However, the strange thing was that after he saw Lu Chuanda, his expression changed for the first time. Yu Fuda's face was rather round. His original appearance was very generous and peaceful, but the moment he saw Lu Chuanda, his eyebrows furrowed fiercely. His eyes revealed a frightening malevolence, as if he had some irreconcilable hatred with Lu Chuanda. He constantly tried to stand up from the chair, and even pulled the handcuffs on his wrists out of shape. His mouth constantly emitted hissing sounds, causing the expressions of everyone present to change greatly. This time, Lu Chuanda could not care about anything else. He hurriedly followed Deputy Bureau Chief Zhang out of the interrogation room. Yu Fuda calmed down a little. He sat back on the chair and stared coldly at the door of the interrogation room. He no longer made any drastic moves. This situation puzzled everyone. Deputy Bureau Chief Zhang left Lu Chuanda's phone number, saying that there might be some things in the future investigation that he needed to consult with him. He hoped that Lu Chuanda could cooperate with the police investigation. After agreeing, Lu Chuanda left the municipal bureau and returned to the Feng Shui metaphysics shop. He went there for a long time. When he came back, Xie Chenghua had already dealt with his own affairs and opened the shop. He was sitting alone in the shop reading a book. When Lu Chuanda came back in a daze, he was about to ask, but just as Lu Chuanda entered the door, the bronze bagua mirror hanging at the door suddenly made a bang sound and fell directly from the door frame. At the same time, the 4 talismans posted on both sides of the door spontaneously combusted and turned into ashes. Lu Chuanda's 7 orifices on his face flowed black blood at the same time, and he directly fainted. After a full 3 days, Lu Chuanda woke up. Fortunately, after waking up, he checked his body and found that there was no serious problem. Later, they guessed that Lu Chuanda had been affected by some strange Taoist technique. However, when he entered the door, the bronze Bagua mirror and the 4 divine talismans had stopped him and turned into black blood. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to keep his life. After listening to them, my face became extremely solemn. Let's not talk about the bloody and terrifying case first. The fact that the bronze Bagua mirror and the 4 divine talismans had spontaneously combusted was enough to shock me. The bronze Bagua mirror was easy to deal with since it was Xie Qinghua's item. When the shop opened, we needed something to ward off Yin and evil spirits, so Xie Qinghua took it out. With the bronze Bagua mirror, ghosts and monsters below the early stage of glorious memory realm wouldn't dare to enter the shop. Later on, I was still worried, so I placed the golden light divine talisman and the pure yang divine talisman on both sides of the door. The golden light divine talisman and the pure yang divine talisman had a strong ability to ward off evil spirits and suppress monsters. With these 4 divine talismans and the bronze mirror's suppressive effect, ghosts and monsters below the heavenly master realm wouldn't dare to enter the shop. For example, the hunchbacked old woman that Xie Qinghua had told us about. She stood at the door and didn't dare to enter because she was afraid of these things. But now, the bronze mirror and the 4 divine talismans had collapsed, and that was how they had neutralized the evil technique on Lu Chuanda. What was the cultivation base of the person who had cast the technique on him? Was it a heavenly master? However, according to what he had said, he had only met Yu Fuda once. He hadn't sensed any sign that the technique had been cast on him. Moreover, Yu Fuda had been easily arrested by the police. Apparently, he was just an ordinary person. Chapter 273. It was late autumn, but the weather in Shenzhen was still hot. Xie Qinghua, Lu Chuanda, and I sat in the lobby, but we didn't feel any heat. After sitting there for a long time, I shook my head and said, "It's better to avoid trouble. Brother Lu, since you're fine, we'll act as if nothing happened. I'll put some talismans at the door. Everyone should be more cautious these days." Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda nodded and put this matter aside for the time being. It was getting late. There were several bedrooms on the 2nd floor of the shop. I simply tidied up one and asked Xiao Jin to stay there. Then, I used the shop's phone to call Yang Kaichen. I talked for a while and found that Yang Kaichen's voice was steady. He didn't stutter at all. I finally calmed down. The situation was similar to what I had expected, although a few heavenly masters of the Metaphysics Society had attacked me that day. It was a secret. The Metaphysics Society wouldn't publicize it, so not many people knew about it. An ordinary feng shui master like Yang Kaichen probably didn't know about it. That way, it would be easier to find information about Yi Pianpian and the fatty. I thought for a while and asked Yang Kaichen to meet me at the hotel I had stayed at before. Yang Kaichen didn't doubt me and readily agreed. After hanging up the phone, I went to Xiao Jin's room to check. He was sitting on the bed and excitedly switched channels with the TV remote control. It seemed that he was very interested in the scene on the TV. I walked in and asked him with a smile, "Why aren't you sleeping yet?" Xiao Jin grinned and looked at me. In his crisp voice, he answered, "When I was trapped in the imprisonment formation, I would sleep for more than 10 days. I've had enough sleep, so I'm not sleepy at all. I didn't feel sleepy at this moment, so I went to his bed and laid down next to him. You heard what we discussed today. What do you think? Xiao Jin blankly shook his head, as if he didn't understand my words. Seeing this, I smiled wryly and shook my head. Although Xiao Jin looked extremely similar to a human, he wasn't a human after all. To him, killing people and dismembering corpses was probably no different from killing 2 ants. I didn't mention it again. Is there any progress in absorbing the true dragon vein? This time, Xiao Jin giggled and said that he had made great progress. However, he was still far from breaking the restriction in his body. I didn't have much hope of relying on Xiao Jin to take revenge. I smiled and encouraged him before lying on the bed to sleep. When he woke up the next day, Xiao Jin was still watching TV with great interest, but the volume of the TV had been muted by him. I couldn't help but smile. This little fellow was extremely intelligent. Seeing that I had woken up, Xiao Jin put down the remote control embarrassedly. He cheerfully walked to me and told me, last night I recalled what we had discussed yesterday. I remembered it was some kind of sacrificial ritual. However, it was a long, long time ago. At that time, he hadn't been imprisoned in the Yellow Spring River. I was delighted, although I had told Xie Chenghua and the others not to pay attention to this matter. People were curious. Hearing Xiao Jin's words, I couldn't help but be interested. I hurriedly asked him when the sacrificial ceremony was held and why it was so bloody. In the end, Xiao Jin shook his head and became confused again. He said that he didn't know the specifics, but it was a long time ago. I went to get a cup of hot water and sat there calculating in my head. I didn't know much about the history of the Chinese civilization, but I knew about the changes of the dynasties. Sacrificial rituals were a big ritual. In ancient times, they were the most rigorous. Most of the things related to worshiping gods, and gods were recorded. Moreover, this ritual had many rules and regulations. Most of the gods and gods could only be worshipped by the king. The common people could only worship their ancestors. However, even if I searched through the books, I wouldn't be able to find such a bloody and terrifying sacrificial ritual. I suddenly had a thought. Could it be a sacrificial ritual from the ancient times? From the bloody scene, it seemed to be the case. However, the scene Lu Chuanda had described wasn't just a simple bloody scene. From the arrangement of the skulls and the use of corpse wax, I could see the signs of civilization. Apparently, it was a sacrificial ritual after entering a civilized society. This made me puzzled. In the history of China, how could there be such a bloody and civilized sacrificial ritual? Could it be a sacrificial ritual outside of the Chinese civilization? After thinking for a long time, I couldn't figure it out. I shook my head and put this matter aside. I checked the time. It was around 8 a.m. I asked Xiao Jin to stay in the room and not go out. I went downstairs to find Xie Chenghua and the others. Yesterday, Xie Chenghua had told me that the hunchback woman usually appeared around 9 a.m. If there were no exceptions today, I guess she would arrive soon. Facing a monster that was close to the heavenly master realm, I didn't dare to be careless. I wanted to meet her personally. When I went downstairs, Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda were already waiting for me in the lobby. When Xie Chenghua saw me, he checked his watch and said with a serious face, "There's still half an hour before the fox spirit arrives. Boss, should we make some preparations?" Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda were much older than me. After working for me, the two of them used to call me Mr. Zhou. I felt awkward and thought that since they were working in my shop, I might as well call them boss. I shook my head and said with a smile, "She has a perfect, glorious knowledge cultivation base. Although she's a monster and isn't proficient in spells, her power still far surpasses us.